one of the reasons I stepped back from social media was because if something can manifest so physically that you're having a fucking seizure, then you probably need to take this more seriously. And that was, that was tough. And that, for me, is my happiness.
Grace Beverley, CEO, founder of 2 multi-million-dollar companies. One's a fashion empire that's focused on sustainability, and one's a fitness empire comprising a mobile app, a supplements business, and gym equipment. She did all of that while studying and graduating from Oxford University, while growing her online channels to millions and millions of followers, while writing a book, and while dealing with all of the things that every other Gen Z person has to deal with at the age of 23. 23. And on the surface, it's easy to understand, while looking in, someone might love to have Grace's life. But as you start to peel back the layers, as we do in this conversation, you begin to understand her obsessive attention to detail, the weight of her workload, and the personal cost of her accomplishments. And you see the impact that those things have had on all parts of her life. And it makes you reconsider. Despite all of this, she's persisted. She stayed true to her values. She's doubled down on the things she loves the most, and she's cut out some of the things that no longer serve her. She's learned lessons that most of us would take a lifetime to learn. And she's 23. It blows my mind. Without further ado, I'm Stephen Bartlett, and this is The Diary of a CEO. I hope nobody's listening, but if you are, then please keep this to yourself. Grace, I started my business at 18 years old as well. You faced a different set of challenges. Not only have you started your business at an incredibly young age, or at least you got into business at an incredibly young age, you face a set of challenges that are even alien to me, in the sense that you are a woman in business. You are taking on various industries that don't want to be taken on, and that really are sort of incumbent monopolies in the space of fast fashion and fitness and those things. I guess my first question is, why did you choose business, and what gave you the confidence to pursue a career that's filled with so much uncertainty at such a young age?
I think people often assume that the first part of it always has to be a kind of, I'm going to start this, I'm going to do this. And I think that mine absolutely wasn't that at all. And I think that that's what often makes me kind of question, the amount of things that have had to fall into place for this to happen. And of course, there's hard work in that, but there's also so many other things that have had to go right. So for me, as I kind of said, when I was 18 and doing an internship at IBM, that's kind of when I started, and I just started I essentially started monetizing something that should be monetized. So it was content I was giving away for free, and then I was going to do lots more of that. And so I decided to monetize it via an ebook. And then, the next year I did more of that. And then then it started picking up momentum. I started doing different products. And I think that's, I guess, often not seen in the way that business is represented. It's kind of seen as like a eureka moment. Then you go and do it, then you put it into action, then you fail once or twice, and then you get it. Mm-hmm. And that it was far more gradual than that. And I think that probably over the past, so it's been 5 years since that moment. I'd say 4 years since the business Shreddy that it is now has, I guess, was founded. And in that time, probably the first 2 years were incredibly gradual, very much a kind of residual extra income, rather than kind of this big, like, these are my goals, this is going to happen within this time. So I guess in that it's been a gradual process, I think the confidence has gathered through that. And a lot of the time I haven't been confident enough to do that, but have, I guess, just done it anyway. So, when I did kind of my second set of ebooks, which was in my first year at university, that was literally because my student loan didn't come through. Like that was the only reason. So as in, I don't think it was necessarily a confidence thing. I think it was more, okay, like, what are we going to do in that situation? And then putting that together and then being able to, leverage a platform to be able to monetize that. So, and then from then onwards, obviously it's been very mindful. It's been very kind of strategic, and that's how it's happened. But I guess the answer is that the confidence hasn't always been there, and it hasn't always been a kind of, I'm going to take on this industry. Sure, starting Tala, that was, but the rest of it, a lot of it has been gradual. A lot of it has been this kind of more just a cumulative, making one decision at a time. which is, I guess, what I kind of try and show as well, so that people can know that it doesn't always need to be this one big decision and this one big business that's going to be the biggest business in the world. It can just be, something you're just doing in that moment.
The world has changed recently over the last 12 months because of the pandemic, and a lot of people have lost their jobs. And so freelance websites and entrepreneurship has now become more in focus as people are trying to find ways to give themselves a little bit more stability in their income. And when I speak to my friends that are, your age, 23 years old, right? 24 next week, the week after, sorry. Or who are younger, 18, 19, or even older, everybody seems to have a business idea.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you're bombarded with DMs like this, right? Everyone has a business idea. There seems to be this barrier between the idea and taking the first step, like making the Instagram page. And is the barrier between that, is it confidence in your view? What is it?
I think it's probably specific to the situation, the person, the circumstance. So, when I was at university, I think that there was something that came together to make me do that. But I was also at university in a place and in a time that I could take, I guess, a risky decision in terms of how I spend my time, in terms of what I'm putting together. I guess I wasn't doing a part-time job at the time that I could have put into that. And so, part of it is circumstance in the way that a lot of people don't necessarily have the backing to put behind it, or it might be the time they can put into it. Lots of people are working 3 jobs just to make ends meet. And therefore, you might have an idea, but actually being able to sacrifice the time spent doing that isn't an option. And I think a lot of the time as well, I think it can be confidence out of that circumstance. It can be, or outside of that circumstance, it can be, should I be doing this? Why should I be doing this? And I think that a lot of the ideas that I've had, I'm sure you'll have the same, there'll be ideas that you have kind of the whole time, and it's choosing the right ones, and it's being able to test it. I'm sure if I tested out my first, I guess what has turned into Shreddy now, if I tested that out, even more gradually, or if it hadn't worked or whatever, I don't know how tenacious I would have been in terms of actually making that happen. And as I say, it's been like an accumulation of that confidence and actually testing things, realizing they work, and then replicating that. So I think we can't necessarily blanket apply it to everyone and be like, it's because of this, it's because of this. But I think that, probably the biggest factors will be circumstance, confidence, and yeah, I guess there are so many things that can stop you, but there are also so many things that can enable you to say, okay, well, this is this. I'm gonna make it happen, or I'm gonna take that leap, or I'm gonna at least do the background work, or do a survey to see if my product would be liked, or whatever it might be.
I think as well, people looking at you or myself that have achieved things in business will see this very polished product, right? And they'll think, well, I'm so far from that, so I'm so far from being capable of what that person has achieved. But as you've described that, which I think is so powerful and important, for you it was taking one step up a very, very 1,000-stair staircase at a time. And as you say, when we look at you now on step 934, we think, oh my God, you probably get this comment a lot, right? She's like, you must be so proud of yourself.
Yeah.
Which is like, well, it's been one step at a time. So, and
I think you can be proud of the steps along the way, but I also think that I look back at some, not necessarily some products, but, some branding, some content, some all of that. And I look at it and I'm like,
and it was crap.
What the fuck is that? That is awful. As in, I would scroll right past that, or I wouldn't, and of course things have changed. People's taste have changed and all of that kind of goes into branding and product and all of that. But there was something, I've sold everything from, t-shirts to notebooks to whatever it would be. It's not everything that's accumulated now is the good things that have then been replicated. It's not everything gets kind of replicated and then, you see all of the end products. There have been some things that never ended up as an end product because they were so shit in the first place that they were never, they didn't deserve that extra time on them. So I think you're completely right. There is this kind of, and I think it's also perpetuated by, unknowingly, often by people like ourselves. So, I think I look at the stuff I share and I look at it and I'm like, God, I'm so much more likely to share if it's this, or, if this product worked out well. And subconsciously, because there was an end of that journey, we don't necessarily say oh, this was the thing that actually went really wrong, because, it's embarrassing. You don't want to share that. You don't kind of think to, because you don't think of the kind of pride in the journey that's got to that point. And so I guess it all does, you will just see the good things, or you might see the bad things that are positioned in an inspirational way, but it's still curated. It's still what I guess is want to be seen.
And to my other point about being a woman in business, that comes with a whole unique set of challenges. You know, I've heard you talk about being underestimated, not taken seriously before. Speak to me about some of those challenges that I wouldn't even, know about.
So I think first, I always also think it is important to preface this with the fact that, yes, I'm a woman in business. I'm also white, able-bodied. I was privately educated. I went to Oxford, a kind of huge list of things that need to be, I guess, contextualized, sure. Which I've always thought is important. And I think that it's, I won't face half the challenges that a Black woman would face in the same position. I think the challenges I do face are, they are kind of often, and they have to be worked through, I guess, and that's been, a journey. There have been, people who have wanted to work for the businesses who clearly won't accept the fact that, I'm not the face of it. Like, I am acting CEO and, I do X, Y, and Z. And there have also been, it's been the same with partnerships. It's been the same with, I think people have a certain perception that's definitely warped and increased and perpetuated by online presence and the fact that I don't just share my work. And I think that, it does come down to these preconceptions. And I know as well, since I've started realizing this, I have preconceptions as well. We'll say like about a woman who's high up who you hear about and you're like, oh God, they're doing really well. Like, why don't I have that? And I think, I often think like, oh, well, apparently they're really hard to work with, or like, they're like whatever. And we all have these own kind of like our own like internalized sexist, whatever it might be, preconceptions in terms of these things as well. And I think that it often comes for women who are successful. You look at them, you probably think one of two things. You either think, or maybe one of three things. You think, wow, amazing, must be Superwoman. Or you think, wow, amazing, but like, oh, I've never seen a partner or like children. Like, do you think they're happy in their personal lives? Or you think, wow, but they're kind of like, either they haven't actually done it, they've just been put at the front of it, or they're like a bitch, or really, really bitchy, or like a tyrant, or whatever it is. And like that is, and I think that when I look at that, I'm like, actually, that's probably the way I see some people, that's probably the way that is in some ways for me and my conceptions. And I think that it's what it's become, and it's actually obviously got better in some ways. It's got hugely better since probably like the 1950s and whatever, but there's still a long way to go in that respect.
When I knew that we were going to be having this conversation, I looked into the general sentiment around your brand, and you've got a hugely engaged, wonderful community of people. You've got this, this true, like I'd call it a fan base or supporters that understand you, and they get you probably because they followed you for a long time and they followed your vlogs and they like know who you are, right? And then, as is the case with pretty much every successful person I've seen, there's also the antithesis of that. There's the opposite. There's people who, as you said, you will try and highlight reasons why you maybe don't deserve to be where you are. You don't deserve credit. This is something that most of the guests I've sat with have faced to some degree. It's not easy to take, right? Because I know, right, I come from a slightly different background, but I know that irrespective of background, you have to work hard, really, really fucking hard. Be honest with me. How does that feel?
I think it's an important discussion to have, first and foremost. I think I'll be the first to say that. And I think a lot of, I spend a lot of time in the book, for example, contextualizing success, because I think it's very important, especially when, you're presented 3 people on your Instagram feed with in the same square, and one of them's your mate from school, one of them's like your mum, and one of them's Beyonce. And it's kind of like this democratization of the news feed that makes everything look the same, and you don't see the teams, you don't see the privilege, you don't see all of the above. And I think that it's a very important conversation to have. So to be perfectly honest, I'd be rather people have that conversation and maybe write off my success based on that. I think that I think also, aside from that, I do think that, you know, a lot of the people who do follow me and have followed me for a long time know my work ethic, and they know that I work hard, and they know that, you know, often that's been an unhealthy amount. You know, I use work as a coping mechanism. So it's been through the worst times of my life. That's what I know I can do. And that's what I throw myself into. And I think that I'd rather that conversation be had and me be able to know in myself why I've been successful and how I've worked. And I think that that's, you know, I guess first and foremost, that's important. And that's how I'm able to, I guess, push through and be able to do what I do, is because I know why it is. I also know that there have been things that have helped me. And then, you know, I guess that doesn't matter. I guess the important thing is that we're able to have the conversations and able to, like, I'm able to know as well. In myself, I know.
That's a very mature position to take. I've got to be honest. It's a very mature position to take. But I'm skeptical as to whether it's always been as easy to take as that. And you know, so talk to me about the process of...
Yeah, I mean, I think that any justified criticism, or, you know, it might be justified, it might be unjustified. Criticism is hard to take. I think you can have a mature standpoint towards something, and equally, it's still going to feel like a punch in the stomach.
Of course.
And that's fine. And I think that one of the things that I wouldn't wish, you know, when I think for my children, that I wouldn't necessarily want them to be in, is I wouldn't want them to be in a higher profile position when they're younger. And because I have this whole chapter in the book, which is essentially I guess probably like the most honest I've been in a long time, because it's, you know, as I've said, there's no instant feedback loop. I can write this and not hear back from it for, you know, a year. And it's me talking about how actually, essentially, I feel like I became known at a time where my self-confidence was at its worst. And therefore I was able to, I guess, rather than filling that lack of confidence with confidence and self-worth, I filled it with validation. And therefore, when I decided to take a step back from social media, because I decided that wasn't what I wanted to do kind of first and foremost as my job, that kind of bandage was ripped off because it didn't exist. And that's when I realized that, you know, these things are the things that we need to be able to deal with, and we need to be able to, I guess, cobble together to be able to, you know, no matter whether this person thinks X, Y, and Z about yourself, how much does that matter? If it does matter, and if you do think it's wrong, are you going to do something about it? And can you still get on with your day, essentially? And I think that there are people who are amazing, who I see on social media, who I wouldn't give a single criticism to that I can think of, that I'm sure get the exact same thing. And there are people who've been to hell and back and get the exact same thing. And there are people who actually have done, you know, have lucked out and get the exact same thing. And in the grand scheme of things, I don't think it necessarily matters. I think what matters is that you know in yourself, and you also know that if there's something that you need to change, then you can change that. Like if you want to, if I guess sometimes when something like other things, you know, like hit a nerve or whatever, like, do you need to change that? Do you need to address that? Do you need to do better? So I think that that's kind of how I tackle it. But of course, no, there's not like something in me where I, you know, get a message that says you look ugly and I'm like, thank you. Like, that's so kind. Like, as in that doesn't happen. Like, that's not an initial reaction. But I think that you have to be rational when we're not designed to be taking this much feedback and criticism, or even if it's not criticism, if someone, like I say the whole time, oh, I don't like that color. I don't like clothing, or like whatever it might be. To the designer, that might like rip them to shreds or whatever. It's not mean. It's an opinion. And we're not designed to be able to take that in. So I think that there has to be a sort of rationalization on a human part, or on your, like, if you are in that position, you have a duty to yourself to learn how to deal with that, or to remove yourself from the situation. Otherwise, it's just untenable, I guess.
You've got, you know, two key businesses. And when you run a business, when you're young, irrespective of age, you undergo a couple of things, real like unexpected chaos at any given moment, then also a tremendous amount of sacrifice. I actually wanted to start on the sacrifice piece, because I don't think people, as you said earlier, get to fully see the full picture of sacrifice and cost, both personal and professional, whatever. So talk to me about some of the sacrifice that even you didn't expect before you got into business and before your business grew.
I think that at the same time as I kind of benefited hugely from the, you know, having money at university, for example, I also went to university expecting one thing and then actually spent it essentially getting up at X hour working on university stuff, because I never ever wanted to give them an excuse to think that I wasn't concentrating fully on my university, and then working all the way essentially way into the night to get the other stuff done. And I also, that comes with being high profile, that comes with all of these things. So I guess one of those things was very much like there was the time and the life experience and all of that because things took off quickly at one stage, even if it wasn't that the businesses took off, the businesses have done much more over the past year and a half or whatever when I haven't been at uni. But at that point, the high profileness, all of that came with, I guess, different to what I was expecting, or not what I was expecting. I wasn't expecting it at all. And therefore there was kind of, I guess, something that I really did want for myself, I didn't get, but I also got, a lot more in another way, I guess. What did you want
for yourself?
I just wanted the university experience, really. Right. And I think that I was once this took off, I'm a very determined person, and I get a vision and I'll work for it day and night. And I think that I actually got to, I think in that instance, it's kind of like a fork in the road, and you decide, okay, well, I'm taking this one and I'm going to concentrate on this. I'm going to grow the businesses. I'm going to all of that. And then I think as well, I saw the deadline for that as my end of university, because if it wasn't as big as I wanted it to be by that time, or if it wasn't, whatever it might be, I was going to go into a normal career. Mm-hmm. And I think that, so I was so dedicated to making that happen, rather than, I wanted to grow up too quickly, essentially. I'm 23, and I think that a lot of that has been, I guess, in terms of people's, when it's people who meet you, their kind of perception of you or whatever it might be. And so I think that was something where it was a choice I'd make again and again, but it was, I guess, a sacrifice that I wasn't expecting to make. And I guess that comes with everything. That comes with, relationships, with friends, with time in general, with, time to yourself, time to whatever. I think having a business in a way, and I'm sure some people will disagree, but having a business in a way is like having a baby, and you can't just like up and do whatever. You can't say no when a crisis comes in at 1 a.m. You can't, like, that is what it is. You get all the other benefits with those conditions. Exactly, yeah. And so I think that, that's kind of a constant one. Like, you can't say, oh, I'm going to quit this and go and do this for 2 years, because especially when you've got X amount of people working for you, you've got all of their salaries, you've got all of their pensions, you've got, like, it's a huge responsibility.
And the buck stops with you, right?
Yeah. And that's, it's an important one.
Sometimes I reflect on the business journey and just how, like, obsessive it is and all consuming it is. And I think it's a bit of a disease. I'm like, why did I choose this to, like,
it's almost like masochistic.
Yeah, it
like,
is.
As in, because obviously it's got the most amazing benefits, but it is also like, I remember my friend, I can't remember, I think we'd agreed to just lockdown things. We'd agreed to watch a movie on a Sunday night, and then the Thing came up, and I was just like, you know what, I'm going to do this. I'm just going to work harder, so it's just going to be easier for this week. And it was like tiny sacrifice. And my housemate turned around to me and she was like, what is the point of you working this hard for this many years if you can't watch a movie on a Sunday night? And I was like, yeah, fair. Like, as in, like, you're not wrong. Like, I'm still going to do it, but, like, you're not wrong. Like, it's...
What is the answer to that question, though? So say, because I've muddled over this as well, if I'm working obsessively every day, at what point is enough?
Yeah,
when does it end?
I think that it all comes with what you want. And I think that, I've listened to you before, and I've listened to you kind of saying that, there came a point that you realised that it wasn't about money. So, like, what was it about? And I think for me, there's the kind of aspect of it's for the businesses, and I have these really clear dreams for the businesses that result in dreams for me as well, sure. But I think that is, I think I'll come to if I decide to sell a business or whatever, I'll come to that road there where I'm like, okay, what is it for now? Mm-hmm. And I think that knowing myself anyway, I know pre-business, post-business, I'm sure, I am like that. So whether it's this or whether it's something else, or, and I hope I can channel that into something else at some point that doesn't require every inch of your being. I know I'm like that. So it's kind of like, yeah, sure, it might be for nothing, but I'm going to do it anyway. Like, there doesn't need to be reasoning behind the fact that this is how I am. I've always been like this. I've always been kind of like, I'm going to make this happen. Like, whether that's kind of through like coordinating all the babysitting jobs that you got in one night and allocating them out to your friends and stuff, and or, you know, like taking essentially like any job ever that I could, then, you know, that's what I'm like. So I kind of know that.
Where did that come from though?
I think probably a few things. I know that everyone in my family is a very hard worker, and that is it's kind of almost like an anxiety to do well, even though like my parents were not pushy at all. I think people assume, you know, especially if you go to Oxford or like whatever, but the least pushy people ever, I think that actually I kind of was discussing this with my sister the other day. I was like, where does it come from? It doesn't come from our parents. Like, it comes from them clearly because they had it in themselves. But, you know, like both my parents had careers when I was growing up. I lived with my mum, just me, my mum, and we had a tenant who lived in my mum's house. And my mum was working pretty much all the time. Incredibly, like, I respect her so much for it, because I also never grew up thinking like, oh, it's weird for a woman to have a career and have 4 children and like whatever. She just, you know, she worked all the time, and she loved it. She loved it, and she gave her like everything to it. And so I think I spent a lot of time kind of in that situation, knowing that I also wanted to love what I do. And I think there is this misled like perception that, you know, like, if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life, blah 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 blah. But I also think that there is this, like, it's a flow state, isn't it? Like, you have something that matches your challenge and your skill level, and you get more fulfillment than you'll get from anything. And I think I remember saying like, I think it was like when I was like 15, 16, and I would take like work experience from anyone every single holiday and every single school holiday. And I remember my teacher saying like, you should probably choose one of the avenues and then you can do like more within that or something. And I remember just saying to them like, I'm so terrified that I'll be stuck in something that I hate. And it was like a constant like, and I don't think it's necessarily good. I don't think it was necessarily healthy. I was constantly so terrified that, you know, the same was for university, the same was for whatever. Like, I didn't get into Oxford the first time I applied. Really? I went again. I literally, that same day, I went online and I found out what I could do for a year that would earn myself some money to be able to not be, I guess, studying that year. And went to and applied for the IBM Futures Scheme, which is the one they do for gap year students, that literal same day. Wow. And then applied again the next year. And like, as in, I'm very like that. It's very set on kind of one thing. And if that thing then doesn't work, I either want to do it again. Like, it's really clear to me. I either want to do it again, or I'm like, that wasn't right. And then I move on. But I know that I'm very straight out and very like, I will not stop until I get it right.
What's the going back to the business and the chaos and the sacrifice, is there one day in your business career over the last couple of years which was your worst day?
I mean,
or your toughest challenge?
I think my toughest challenge in general was, there was this stupid time that I'm constantly praised for, that was the worst decision I've ever made in my life, which was that I was coming up to my university finals. I was launching a business I think it was a month before my university finals. Yeah, I was launching a business at the beginning of May, the 7th of May, if I'm right. And I finished my finals on the 6th of June. Now, that meant that 40,000 words were due and 5 3-hour exams within the space of 2 weeks. And I also wanted to launch my business, and I also wanted to do well at university. I'd been working with that for 3 years. But I'd persuaded people as well. I'd persuaded people to spend money on this launch. I'd persuaded people to, you know, so I was going to do it right. People were like, you're amazing. Like, this is so great. Like, how can you do this? And I'm like, you are like, it's not wise. It's not smart. Like, it's not like, this isn't a competition for how many boxes you can tick within a small space of time. That is like a fast track towards burnout. And either something going incredibly wrong or whatever. And I think that, you know, like, as I've said, work was always a coping mechanism for me. So it's always kind of like, well, if we have to do it now, or we like run out of money before launch, then we're doing it now. And I don't care. Like, I can work X, Y, and Z. And I actually have like a whole chapter in a book where I'm essentially talking about like, that was the time that I felt most validated in being a hard worker. And I felt like, because I was in the library at 3 a.m. and I was also on the phone with the suppliers at, you know, 7 a.m. the next morning, and all of X, Y, and Z, and people could see it, and I was living it. I was like hustling the hustle. And that was when I was like, wow, like, this is it. Like, I am the hard worker, like, with capital H and W, and like, this is me. And I think that is like, that kind of like sums it all up in the way that was a huge challenge, also an incredibly unwise challenge at the time. And yet, why did that feel like the time I was doing it right? So that's a lot of what spurred on essentially why I was writing the book, because it was kind of like, how can that be the epitome of hard work when that is also the epitome of not being productive? Like, that's like completely unproductive, and not useful for anyone. You're not going to be nice with the people you deal with at the time. You have a higher chance of actually like messing things up and all of that. And yet, why was that the one time that I felt like truly validated for what I was doing?
And you were broadcasting that?
And I was broadcasting that, and there'll be people, I'm sure, who see me now who are like, but she, you know, did this and that. And like, yeah, sure, I work really hard. I really do. But there are some things that it's kind of like, I address that. And what, like, as I said to you, while I was writing the book, there were so many things that I noticed. I was like, I'm the problem here as well. I perpetuate this. How can I criticize a culture, the hustle culture, that I benefit from at the same time? How can I do that? And I think that that's what made me, you know, that's why I say that this book was such like a soul searching process for me, because I was like, you know, what is that? Why is that? Like, is that because I need the validation? Is that because we all need the validation now? Because hard work has become so unobtainable, because it has to be doing this job, that job, like everything in between, also being amazing at self-care, also doing like X, Y, and Z. And I think that that's when I was kind of like, okay, this is a challenge, but it's not only a challenge, it was a silly thing to do. So it's not even like a, you know, there are things you have to do, there are crises you have to deal with and all of that will be a challenge and will also be incredibly rewarding and all of that. And most of them are. But I think there are other things that you look at and you're like, yep, this was a challenge and it also didn't have to happen. Let's not do that again.
As you guys know, I'm a massive fan of Huel. I've been consuming the products for about 4 years now, and you know that I attribute much of my health and fitness goals that I've achieved over the last 12 months to Huel. And more recently, I've started having the hot and savory bags of Huel. And as someone that really loves to have the ready-to-drink Huel, it's actually been really nice to find a product that is a meal, but still gives me all of the protein and the nutrients and the minerals and the fibers that I need for my diet. So I'm now on the hot and savory journey. Join me if you want to. My favorite flavor is the Thai green curry flavor. And I like to add loads of cayenne pepper to it, because I'm from Africa and I really like spice. So give it a shot. You mentioned burnout.
Yeah.
And I remember reading a quote in a piece that, you know, an interview that you did where you talked about mental health generally and how, you know, you'd reflected that maybe you weren't representing mental health in the right way. I think you said you were giving advice, but it didn't apply to yourself in terms of like talking and being open about it. I want to know about...
You've gone a long way back.
I've just been digging through everything.
2.5 years ago.
Yeah, I just wanted to get a flavour for everything and your,
I appreciate
your perspective
it.
on everything. But talk to me about your mental health and the journey you've been on with your mental health since you were, 18.
Well, as I've said, I think probably one of the reasons that I think I, in that post, to give context, I guess I said that I am one of the biggest advocates for people talking about their mental health. We have mental health days like within the company, like, you can take days off and you can literally just take a duvet day, and it could be because of your mental health, whatever it might be. And I'm the biggest advocate for that and talking about it and everything. And then as soon as it came to me, no. Like it's not the same case. Like, I'm not going to talk about it. I'm not going to deal with it. And it actually got to a point that I was having seizures, essentially, from something really horrible that I went to that was essentially ended up giving me PTSD that presented in seizures. And obviously I was having symptoms up to the point of the seizures, but I only took it seriously when it was a physical symptom. Like when it came to the point that I was like, okay, like I'm being hospitalized now. Like this is not ideal at all. And that was the thing that made me slow down. And that was the thing that made me, or not even slow down. I don't even think I necessarily hugely slowed down after that, but it was kind of like, okay, this is real. And this is just as like, if something can manifest so physically that you're having a fucking seizure, then you probably need to take this more seriously. And that was, you know, like that was tough. That was right before my third year at university that started. And everything up until then, like I think I have this like really toxic mental health attitude within myself that doesn't prioritize it, that kind of sees it as weakness, even though that's the last thing that I'd see, you know, in any of my friends who suffer from depression or anxiety or like whatever it might be. And it's completely different. It's like, we don't get the same treatment. I'll give you, you know, I'll understand that and I'll see that and I won't do that. And I'm sure there are lots of people who are the exact same.
You're not being compassionate to yourself.
Exactly. And I think that that's another reason why I really needed to like look inside myself and be able to evaluate that and be able to look at like, why is that the case? Like, why do you feel so undeserving of the justification for like, you know, having bad mental health at one time? And I've been lucky that, you know, apart from this, which was a result of specific trauma, I've generally been, you know, I've had generally good mental health, and I've, you know, been able to deal with, I guess, you know, like I think a lot of the way that mental health is presented is really damaging in that, you know, people do, I've had friends who have kind of said like, oh yeah, but, you know, I don't want to take meds for my depression or whatever, and everyone has different views on it, but it's kind of being like, well, any other chemical imbalance in your brain you would, because you'd say like, hey, I need this to offset this, or I need insulin to offset this, or whatever. And yet it's like it's a thing, it's like a, you know, what's she called, like Mrs. Trunchbull, you know, from Matilda, that you like have in your brain that's like, you do not like get this, or like you do not like deserve to have that compassion, or whatever it might be. So I think like I've had and I think what's so strange is that I don't know about you, but I'm able to talk about mental health really openly. And I literally so I thought it was really important for me to, I think as a business owner, I think it's probably important for probably all, I mean, I think it's important for everyone, but for business owners, I think it's important for everyone to get therapy, because you're not meant to go through that much chaos all the time. Like you're not meant to have 3 messages a day that could kill your business. And yet you do. And you're like, and then you're like the next, like 15 minutes later, you're like, so what's next? Like as in you're fine. You get like programmed to get up again. As like second nature, and then you never deal with things. So I kind of decided, I was like, I'm just gonna have it once a week, and it's just gonna be literally like an offload. And then I sat in it for kind of like 2 months, and I was like, I haven't cried yet, and I'm a crier, so I'm clearly talking about my mental health stuff as if I'm doing an interview, and if I'm like, you know, just able to talk about it like, yeah, like I think it's important, and like this is, and it's like, this is everything that's okay to talk about, this is everything that's not, and I won't address that. And I think that that's something for me to, I guess, to deal with. And I think that the important thing is, as an owner of a business that has people within it, and you know, and as someone with a platform and all of that, all of those things make it really important for me to treat mental health properly, both for myself and for other people. But I don't think I do.
But you are setting a really you know, what you said there about being a business owner and it's important for you to get therapy. One of the other points that I think of good that you'll be doing by doing that is you're setting a precedence for all of your employees that even me as the boss, you know, and that creates a safe space for other people. In my business, it was the same. So we made mental health therapy opt out.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, so like, and it meant that the men who were hiding in the back that didn't want it to be tough guys or whatever, you know, I was going, and I told the directors of the business, my co-founder, to go as well. And that week, my co-founder Dom said he got something like 11 messages from men in the business that had been suffering from mental health, but just had never spoken about it. And he became like the de facto male therapist in our company for that reason. What I wanted to go back to you on is the point, you know, you talked about this build up that you had, which culminated in you being hospitalized with your mental health. I had a guest on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, and she's a kayaker, and something changed in her life, and it meant, and she wasn't listening to her body, and ultimately she ended up getting chronic fatigue syndrome, where she went from being a kayaker that could kayak for 2 hours to not being able to lift up her hands. And she said, there were these warning signs in my life that I just ignored until my body went, listen, if you're not going to listen to me, then we're shutting down. And it sounded very similar to what you were saying. So my question is, what were those warning signs that you were, in some respects, by the sounds of it, ignoring?
Yeah, I won't talk about specifically from that perspective. I do think it's important to talk about in terms of burnout as a whole. So I think the same thing applies to kind of like the way that this kind of productivity like rat race comes across now, is that you essentially need to be working as fast as you possibly can. It's not productivity at all. It's working, I guess if you look at productivity, like the definition is that you get the most amount done in the least amount of time. But that has fine, like that taken as one, and then that's multiplied. So you're getting the most amount done in the least amount of time so that you can do the most amount in the least amount of time again, rather than being able to just, do that and move on. And fine, that's good. Like we should be efficient, we should be effective. All of these things are important. But I think that, it's also the equivalent of expecting someone like that, or a marathon runner, ultra marathon runner, to sprint for the whole marathon. Like, it's ineffective. They're not going to win. They're also probably going to get injured. There's nothing beneficial about it. And we see it from a physical perspective, and we completely ignore it from a mental perspective or from a work perspective. And I think that that's why it's so important to talk about, especially you and me, people who are essentially will be seen in some way as like what hard work looks like that results in success, or whatever it might be. The acknowledgement that working hard does not mean working all the time, and like having it all does not mean like doing it all, and all of these various different things that actually are important to look at from ourselves as well. Because like, as I said, like I realized that actually probably I was perpetuating a lot more than I meant to, and that was why I then ended up needing to perpetuate things, because I constantly wanted to show people that I was actually working hard, which actually all it gave off was this is what hard work looks like. And therefore there's, it's probably stopping a whole generation of people who actually want to do something, but I'm not that type of person. I actually don't get up in the morning and want to read like some disgustingly boring like nonfiction book. And like, but actually being able to acknowledge that and find some middle ground and find some realization that it doesn't all, like, it's not going to be the same for you as it is for someone else. And the same goes for hard work. And I think for me, I now, and I think largely because of having written this book, I now see when I'm lagging. I now see when I need a rest. I now see, I'm able to construct a working week that essentially, I'm able to be CEO at both companies, and I'm able to do all my work, and I'm able to do my own work too that isn't just responsive to other people's work. And then I think, and I'm able to culminate that in a way that is, I guess, a livable way of me working. And there have been times where it's not that. There have been times where it's, like hell to leather and doing everything possible, but that's a needs must amount of time. That is not representative of what hard work looks like. And then being able to recognize that within myself and say, like, that's okay. Like, you're not weak because you have to sleep. Like, you're not weak because you have to, like sit back sometimes, or your creativity just isn't coming out. You're just like a human, or not even like, even machines can't do that. Like, if you had a machine like working, like it would go into override, or if it was set on the wrong thing, or if it was, like doing too many things at once, it would go into override. So like, it's not even that we don't realize we're humans. We don't realize like limits at all. We just have no boundaries. And I think that's what's important.
There's been a big shift, I think, over the last, I'd say 2 years. There's been a huge conversation around burnout, right? And it's gotten to the point, I did a post about this the other day, but it's gotten to a point where I actually feel bad talking about working hard. And I played around with that idea because on one hand, you can be deceitful in the sense that you say, like, I work 24 hours a day and I never sleep. And on the other hand, you can be really deceitful in saying, listen, hard work doesn't matter.
Self-care and like, sit back and put on a face mask.
Yeah,
and
but like, I don't want to lie to you. I still work really hard, but obviously there's nuance and balance, and sometimes I don't have good days. And sometimes, but I don't know anyone that's really successful that doesn't work hard. I don't know any athlete.
100%.
So
I think what I even realized that was after I kind of went through all of this like self-discovery and writing the think pieces and all of that, and then I sat down to write the productivity method, and I was like, I feel like Gordon Ramsay telling someone he's like an idiot sandwich. Like, I literally feel like I'm being that harsh just because I'm telling you that actually if you want to get that done, you've got to get it done. And like, I think that's why the whole reason I repositioned it, rather than, it's not just because as soon as you're that, then you're equally as harmful in the perpetuation of like self-care culture that now has these knee-jerk reactions that's either like it's like a cult and it's like this wellness thing, or it's like a waste of time. There's like a middle ground, like that is important for everyone, but it doesn't just need to be kind of like, you know, like face masks and everything. It can be, it has to be like part of all of it. So yeah, you might work till 3 a.m. from 6 a.m. every night for a month. I would argue that that's not that possible beyond that point. Like it might be, and you might be an incredibly hard worker, and you know, like, and I perceive myself to be, but you still, at the end of it all, you still need rest. And yes, you're completely right. There's no glory and no kind of benefit in also perpetuating the other side. You know, sometimes self-care is the most productive thing you can do, but also sometimes productivity is an act of self-care. Like, you need to, it's self-care to look at that project that you've been putting off for 3 weeks for the 50th time and actually get it done. That's self-care. Like, that isn't, it doesn't have to be, you know, this, that, or the other. It doesn't need to be compartmentalized into like, you know, some forms of work are self-care. Some forms of self-care are like, what, you know, like it goes both ways. And I think that that's what's important. I think it's rather than choosing one or the other, it's just real. It's like being realistic and being, you know, you don't always need to be like disarmingly like, I've had a bad day today. Because I also feel in the same way, like, I can't be asked to do that the whole time. Like, I don't, like, when I've had a bad day, I don't instantly think like, I will get the reward from being vulnerable by sharing this on social media. Like, that's not my instant reaction. But at the same time, there is an importance. And I do think that people like us also have a duty to be able to share both sides, even if it's that being like, you know, like I was up till 11 last night writing a crisis plan for something, like, you know, like you constantly have these things, and it's like, and then like, so there's just so many different types of, I guess there are so many different angles to it, and as long as there's kind of a more realistic thing, as long as you don't feel weak to say that you sleep or whatever, and you also don't feel like you're being like really mean to say like you have to work hard to do well, both of those things are wrong. So like there must be a middle ground.
And the left side you speak to, I'm just calling it the left just because it was the left. I raised my left hand when I described it. I'm not saying it's the left, but it is. Is like, I've always considered myself to be more left than I am anything else. But I felt somewhat alienated by this kind of lack of personal responsibility, blame someone else, pessimism, culture that's emerging from that side. And I, in some respects, as someone that's been a social media seer for about almost 10 years, I understand the algorithms will create echo chambers and they'll reinforce things, and they're actually polarizing us to be the right and more on the right and the left more on the left. And my point here is that I like to be a bit more nuanced. I don't think binary solutions to complex problems ever make sense. Left, you know, rich, poor, black, white, left, right, whatever it is. And I posted something about personal responsibility and being grateful and things you can do if you're feeling bad. And there was a lot of people that said I was, and I actually take this as a compliment, they said I was toxic positive. And there's this whole new phrase now, being too positive, being so positive that it makes people feel bad. And I don't give a shit, right? Like, if we're
I also think we have toxic things within ourselves, and that's like,
what's toxic negative?
But also like, you can tell me I'm toxically positive, and I like, so for example, like I might be the same in that I know that, you know, I would consider myself probably like a realist. Like I wouldn't consider myself like a constant optimist, but I also know that like my coping mechanism for anything going wrong is to make something else go right. So if that needs me to work hard, if that needs me to push completely into work for 40 days and 40 nights, then like I'll do it. But I think that, you know, you know, being able to label something as something doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad. I think, sure, if someone thinks that toxic positivity, then fine. I don't think that necessarily needs to be kind of, you know, like nothing is going to be nuanced enough on social media for you to understand unless it's like a 2,000 word think piece. But I also think that like these things exist. Like we all know some of these. Like I know that I have bad coping mechanisms in some way. I know that. I don't need anyone else to tell me. Or if they do, like it's fine, but it doesn't, like there's no benefit here. Like you're still going to think that way, and therefore if you're sharing more of your thoughts, it's still going to be like that. You might be toxically positive, but that's you know, that's you, and that's what you're also going to say. And like that would also be, you would also be lying to then say, okay, well, I'm going to make this more realist, and so I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, and I'm going to put that out there. And then there are going to be more people who say the other side. So it's like you can either spend your life like swinging back and forth between like what people perceive to be right, and you're never going to get everyone because obviously, as you say, it's completely polarized. Or you can kind of be like, yeah, you might not like this.
My whole stance is like, I've read a lot of stuff about psychology, studied psychology for a little while. I've had my life experience. And if you follow me, you're here to get that stuff. And you don't have to agree. You don't even have to like it. And there's loads of other, and I think I did a story the other day being like, there's loads of places you can get like fluffy, face masks or the answer to everything stuff. It's just not here because of my lived experience. And I understand I have a bias because I'm an individual that's had an individual experience. When I was stalking you online, Grace, I found it really hard to find a boyfriend. I was looking a lot. Like I was like, I found like, I was like, fuck it, we'll try Google Images. Google Images. I was like, these are just friends. And then I was like,
yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone will find a boyfriend probably until I'm maybe married with kids. That, I mean, as in,
this
not
is a conscious
that there won't
choice
be one. Yeah, I'm not. It's not.
There's a boyfriend there because I read some stuff about you meeting this guy when you were like 15 and then you.
Oh, no, there's not a boyfriend there.
Oh, there's not a boyfriend
there. There's not a boyfriend there. But there's never going to be a boyfriend there for people to see.
Right.
But yeah.
Being young, being successful, being a woman.
I know where this is going.
Yeah. So maybe I don't have to ask the question. I'm just saying, like, I asked this question a lot of guests because I've struggled myself, right? So being young, you're a successful woman in business. A lot of guys, just going to be honest, would be quite intimidated, right? You don't have to answer that, but they would. I'm one of them, I'll tell you. Right? I'm not speaking from myself. I'm speaking from some insecure friends that I have that would feel intimidated by their partner who is a woman being successful. That's just, some men are insecure enough to find that emasculating.
Yeah.
Talk to me about the difficulties of having romantic relationships when you are young, you are successful, you are a woman.
I'd say it's not necessarily what I'm concentrated on first and foremost.
Okay.
And just from like, I want to do lots of things before I concentrate on that. I also think that one of the things that I guess I found, because what you're saying is true. But I think what I find comforting in that is also the fact that like, I don't want to be with someone who finds that emasculating. So I think it's quite a good, kind of whittle down process.
Yeah, nice.
Because like, if you find it emasculating, like that's fine. In the same way as like any other thing that people might not like about someone, you don't want to be with someone who doesn't, like my work is the biggest part of me. And that's really sad. It's not, but like it's a huge part of my life, and it will be. And I would never want to be with someone who thought that was any short of like great. And so it doesn't necessarily, I mean, maybe it will trouble me down the line, but currently it's kind of like, yes, I completely agree. I think people do find it intimidating and emasculating. I also think that that's kind of, as I say, that doesn't necessarily change anything, because it's actually not, I would have no interest in being with someone who can be emasculated by that. So.
And at this point in your life, do you foresee in the future at some point you wanting to be with a partner?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think naturally, a lot of people do. I'd say probably presume. The large. Yeah. And I think that it's important, especially with women, not to presume, because
I've made that mistake before.
Yeah. No, I mean, I couldn't have like one friend who I think of who I know she knows that she doesn't want to like ever have like a life partner. Like it doesn't make sense to her, which I think is completely, I think makes sense, but I think that absolutely at some point, and but I'm in no rush. I mean, I'm very young.
When that day comes,
yes.
What are the difficulties you see in the current way that you live your life and forming a relationship with whoever this lucky person might be?
I'd say the first problem is probably going to be closet space. I think in general.
Why is Grace difficult to date, and why?
Probably yes. You should probably ask a few people. No, I mean, I think that I'm an incredibly loving person, and I'm incredibly dedicated to the people I love. And that currently is filled by amazing friends and family and people I'm lucky to have in my life. And I think that will, at some point, as I say, like that will absolutely, hopefully be filled by, you know, that type of position. But I think that the difficulties would probably just, you know, be around understanding that work is as important as it is to me. And I think that, you know, like I've had relationships in the past, and that is, you know, like it does become a problem. And I also think that, you know, then you can't necessarily combat that by having someone who's the same, otherwise you're never going to see each other. Like, I think I probably, you know, would want someone who has the same values in that way, but there has to be like a kind of middle ground, or there has to be then, you know, some sort of way in which you will see each other once every 15 years or something. But no, I think the troubles will be around work, and they won't be around emasculation, because, as I say, that wouldn't be, you know, then there's no space for that. But I think, you know, in the same way as I'm able to be a great friend and family member and, you know, all of that now, it's to me, it's an extension of that. To me, it won't be, you know, any different. I know in my qualities, you know, I probably the part of the reason why that's not what I want now is because I also know that I care a lot about that. So, you know, if I am in that situation, I will give a lot to that, and currently I don't have a lot to give to that. So, you know, I think it's a prioritization for me, and currently that's not a priority. Yeah.
How has running business and the way that people have treated you in business, especially being a young entrepreneur, and I reflect on this in my own life, changed you as a friend, as a person, you know, your patience, your snappiness, your tolerance?
I think I'm a lot more, I think that's part of it that's actually quite interesting that I've been thinking more about recently, where if you're in business and you call the shots, how does that develop in friendship? So I've actually talked about that recently. I don't think I've had to grow in confidence to say, especially to, for example, men who have far more experience than me and are technically, you know, working for me. Like there's been a point where it's kind of like, can I say like that this is not right, or like whatever? And I've developed that. But I think, you know, I've now developed that well, and I don't think I have a problem with that now. And therefore, I think that, you know, there's going to be part of that where you then, like, how does that switch off automatically the second you step through your door and you're with your family or your friends or your housemates or whatever? And I think that that's probably something that I'm very grateful that I think someone once asked me, like, how do you stay, like, grounded and down to earth? And I think that I don't go for the types of friends that, obviously my friends like bring me up and they're my biggest fans, but there is no smoke being blown anywhere. As in, they will be the first person to also say, you know, and that's what I value. Like, I don't want to be in a superior position in friendship, in family relations, in whatever it is. And I will never be with the friends and family that I have. And I think that that's so important. And I think that can absolutely affect people. And I think that, you know, I've seen people then surround themselves only with people in their position or only with whatever. And I think that, you know, one of the most valuable things I have is that a lot of my friends are in entry-level jobs, and I'm able to see from their point of view what's the most frustrating thing about their workplace and not feeling valued or whatever. And I can make sure that I try for like my best to make sure that never happens for people within mine. And I think that so you can get those, you know, you get so many benefits from having different people around you. Primarily, like, no one is kind of there, as we say, blowing smoke.
What about when the bill comes?
Oh, well, first of all, you'll be pleased to hear that my friends like to go to very cheap places, which I also like. I love a, you know, nice dinner and a nice, like, whatever, but you will not, I mean, you'll find me buying a bottle in a club if it's one of my friends' birthdays or like whatever, you know, like I love treating my friends. I love taking them on holiday. Like I love, you know, but you can tell when that's someone who's there for that. I also have the large majority of my friends have been around me for a long time. And I think I generally trust myself to be a good judge of character. I've got it wrong before. You know, I've had things where I've kind of like taken people on trips left, right and center, and then you can tell that like that was the aim. But like in general, actually, you know, I have amazing people around me, and like I think I like to consider myself a generous person, and I want to, you know, do things like sometimes I will just be like, I'll just get this, or like whatever it might be, and I'm in a position to do that. And I think especially if, you know, there'll be a friend who's been asking for her workplace for a raise for 3 years and it hasn't even gone up with inflation. And there's kind of like all of the, and like there are ways that you could like, as in, help, and it's not compensating for that, but it's being like, you need to be able to be grounded enough and like whatever to be able to still be a friend to people who are in, you know, either a very different situation or like whatever it might be. And I think that I never want to lose that. So yeah, I'll buy nice things for people and I'll do that just as I would for anyone, like my sisters or whatever, if they need something. But it's not, I think I'll tell instantly, and maybe not, maybe I'm being walked all over by everyone, but I'm happy. So
no, I mean, we find ourselves in the same position largely, right? And I think the interesting point is you've been successful and the people that you love, you want to share that, you know, you want to have good times and good experiences with, but being realistic, mathematically, they won't be able to have those experiences unless you create them, right? And so that creates a bit of an issue for you because you want to, you know, have good times with your friends, but you know that you're gonna have to create that situation, whether it's a holiday, and it's not a problem for you because you love these people and they're good people, but it can sometimes create...
Yeah, of course. And there's I think also like the important thing because I know people who talk about that problem, but also they love the flex. So it's if you're complaining that you're always the one paying for the bill and you're also the same person saying for 3 weekends in a row, let's go to Nobu, or even one weekend, like, oh, it's fucking expensive. Like, you know, like you're gonna, like, that generates a certain type of thing. And I think that, you know, that's not necessarily their fault then, but I also think that there's a, you know, if you want to be doing that all the time and you're the only person in that position in your friend group, then you're, you know, there's a certain thing that's demanded of you. But I think like at the same time, like you can be a good friend and be like very generous and like I understand that I'm incredibly fortunate to be in my position and I want to get them nice Christmas presents and nice like whatever it might be, and take people on holiday, like if, you know, I want to go or whatever it might be. But I think, largely, it's not a difficult position to be in. Like, it's an incredibly fortunate position to be in, but there are things that come with it. And I think that, you know, thankfully I haven't been, I guess, like harmed by that too much. And I, you know, I don't want that to make me a bad person. And I don't think
it sounds like you're keeping the right people around you. That's probably the most important thing, right? People that will tell you when you're stepping out of line.
Oh, trust me. Yeah.
Exactly.
They'll be the first person to be like, this comes across awfully. So bad. I'll be like, thank you so much. That's really good.
Like, no more trips to Dubai, Becky. You guys will hear me mention a service called Fiverr quite a lot, especially if you follow me on LinkedIn and Instagram. And this has been another week where I've really relied on Fiverr to help me and to help our business extend our capacity. This week, we're having a newsletter website launching called mentalwealth.com, which is being developed on Fiverr. We're also using a freelancer we found on Fiverr to cut the edits for this podcast promo that will go on my social channels. And this is really the beauty of Fiverr. Even when I was a CEO of a company with 700 employees, or even now when I don't have a company and we have a much smaller team, there are still moments where we need to extend our capacity, usually because of, you know, we've got a sprint or a project to do in a cost-effective way. Thank you to them for sponsoring my podcast. And if you want to check out Fiverr, there's a link in the description below. That's fiverr.com/CEO. We talked a little bit before we started recording about working culture and how working culture has changed and how the pandemic has shifted things to being, you know, working from home. What's your take on working culture and how teams should operate and how your teams operate and stuff?
So I've been reading a lot about this recently, actually. General things, you know, like rework, work rules, like all of those types of books talking about working culture. And I think that the main point of interest for me that I've kind of been exploring, obviously, has been the idea of working culture, but how we internalize it and how our lack of boundaries within this generation has meant that we have no boundaries between work or not work. So it's kind of, you can be working anywhere and everywhere. So when you're not, you've kind of internalized this idea that when you're not working everywhere and anywhere, it's the equivalent of like being in an office and taking a nap, like just because you're living your life. And I think that to me is that stands out as the most problematic kind of side of working culture within our generation. I also think that is coupled with, you know, like companies like Google, for example, who are seen to have really good working culture because they support their employees, they, unlimited holiday, all of that. Some of that is also a thinly veiled way of making people work more because they don't have to do their laundry, they don't have to cook their lunch, they don't have to, they're not going to take any of that holiday if they're given unlimited, but they do feel valued, so they work harder, and I think that it's really complex. And I think that it's not necessarily like, I definitely couldn't deconstruct it as a whole, and I probably perpetuate it in some ways, but I think that it's important that we look at it more and more now. These boundaries are absolutely gone, especially, I started having some of these thoughts and feelings when I started working from home before we progressed to having an office. And I kind of was thinking like, why am I working more than I ever have and producing less than I ever have? And also my mental health is on the floor. Yeah. And I think that then when kind of there was the office exodus going at the kind of pandemic, and then people kind of saying the same thing and all of that. And I was like, oh, good. And I'm like, why am I feeling happy at, the fact that everyone else is struggling too? And it was, it's a lack of boundaries. We have awful boundaries surrounding work, surrounding success, surrounding all of this. And it's part of a generation that I guess bulldozes boundaries in a kind of progressive sense, but it ends up meaning that we actually don't know where we stand. We don't know what is good for us. And I guess we are constantly on the hustle train being told to like do more, think more, achieve more, like XYZ, without ever questioning whether it serves us, because that's what we've been put on. Like if you're a hard worker, you have to go in that kind of way. And I talk a lot in the book as well about like the kind of contradiction between the progressing values of like a 4-day work week and, amazing, places like Nordic countries that have amazing work rules and all of that. And at the same time, like at literally the exact same time, and often by the same, people, the same kind of examination of it, we also have this idea that you kind of need to work all the time. And it's like, how are we progressing in these two completely different directions? And we don't necessarily know which one is right. And then if we're going down to the 4-day work week, is that because it makes us more productive? So technically it's actually to make us like work more or produce more or whatever it might be. Yeah. And so I guess it's all just very complex. And I think that there's not enough examination around it in the mainstream, I guess. Like you should be able to, if you're in the financial position too, and you want to and everything, like you should technically be able to take your work down to 4 days a week or whatever. And that seems like the most ludicrous suggestion ever, because you could always be producing more, you could always be doing this, you could always, well then you should side hustle and that 3-day weekend you get and like X, Y, and Z. And so I think it's damaging. And I think that, yeah, as I say,
isn't there something funny here where because we're talking about ideas that we would probably never live ourselves.
Yeah,
like you're not gonna take 3 days off for a fucking weekend. And
I'd love to.
Yeah, would you?
I think I'd go insane.
You can.
but yeah, fair. But yeah, no, I think it's completely true. And I think that part of this has been me being like, okay, this is really unhealthy. This is actually problematic. This is XYZ. And yet you are the embodiment of all of them.
It's like trying to figure out how to...
But that's important. And I think social media discourages that type of thought because you have to be on the defensive. You have to say like, yeah, this is a bad idea and this is a bad idea. And yet I do both of them. You have to either acknowledge it's a bad idea or not acknowledge it's a bad idea and just do it. You can't have this like cognitive dissonance of thinking one thing and like doing another. Because yeah, like sure, that's a bad thing in some ways, but also like, you have to accept the fact that you don't always think what you're doing is a good idea, or you don't, you know something's good in theory, but don't do it or whatever. And I think social media completely bulldozes that opportunity because you have to like stand firm. You have to stand your ground. You have to, and I found myself actually getting quite, one of the reasons I stepped back from social media was because I felt like I was justifying myself constantly, not outwardly, to myself. Because I was like, I need to, but like, if I agree with this, why do I do this? And like all of that. And I think that I had to be like, this is causing so much, like I'm going into overdrive because I don't know how to deal with the fact that I have multiple thoughts at once. Yeah. Because social media makes you linear. It makes you,
binary.
It makes that like lack of nuance, like your thing, like it's the MO. And so I think that's kind of, yeah, where I realized that like we just can't discuss anything. Like you have to choose your camp, you have to choose your like whatever.
You when I first came across you, it was a couple of years ago, and it was actually on Twitter, and I think, I don't know, I followed you, you followed me, let's just go with you followed me because it makes me look better. And I went on your profile and I remember going down and thinking, here we have an influencer who actually like stands for something. And that was my only like real sort of that was my first sort of take on you. And then a couple of years passed by, whatever. And I wondered, as I was, going through some of the tweets more recently that were, people just talking nonsense, whatever. I wondered, there's a cost to that.
Mm-hmm.
There's a real cost to standing for something, because then it's much easier just to stand for nothing, because then I can't attack you for anything, right? Because you don't, but when you decide that you want to stand for something, whether it's sustainability or whether it's certain values, you then are interrogated for perfection.
Yeah.
And one human step out of line, we've got you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think the same as in everyday life, but it's magnified to a point, in the same way I remember when I went vegan like 3 years ago now, and my friend said that the reason I went vegan was because my friend was ill at the time and she couldn't eat any dairy products, and she was upset about it, and we were actually going traveling together, and so I said I would do it with her, and we were like, let's just try it, like it'll be fun. And I was like, fuck, I really do not want to give this up, but we did it, and then we actually stuck to it, and I was kind of like, I actually like this, it works really well for me, and she was saying how hard her friends were taking it, and how like they were just like, be like, ha, you just ate that actually apparently has like this. And it's like, it's the same, it's just magnified. And I think that part of it's projection. Mm-hmm. We don't like to acknowledge that we think one thing and sometimes do another in ourselves, but we love to pick it up on other people. Sure. And I think part of it's just, as we say, it's the binary of social media. It's the lack of kind of, it's the fact that is going to happen. And I do, you find yourselves doing things the whole time where you're like, ooh, we shouldn't have done that, or like whatever. And I think social media amplifies that to the point that it's so much more of a big deal than it needs to be. Sometimes it doesn't need to be a big thing. Like, I'll stand by the fact that, cancel culture, fine. Like, in a lot of ways, not great. In some ways, like, there are some areas, really shouldn't be said or whatever. But I think that there's also like an aspect of that that's kind of, we live our lives constantly thinking one thing and doing another, like cognitive dissonance. Like, sure. You should be better for the planet, and yet you still buy fast fashion, or you still like eat meat every day, or like whatever it might be. It's how we operate. And I think that isn't allowed on social media. I don't think that's like a complaint. I think it's more like that's how social media is. Yeah. And therefore, if you're using it in that way, there kind of needs to be an acknowledgement of the fact that that's just like, I know that, and I know where I go wrong, and I know, like where I'd like to do better, and that's for me to deal with. So, so I think that that's something that we see across our lives, and it's just hugely magnified. When
you made this decision to step back from social media, I noticed you hadn't posted on YouTube either for about 11 months. I have all my dates. Was there a part of you that thought you had let this negativity of social media win?
I think anytime I've thought that, I've realised that it's completely untrue, because I've realised it later. So when I stepped back from YouTube, that was a bit after all the things I've talked about that like I was going through, and it wasn't right for me, and I just decided not to do it. And I think that also part of that was a business decision. It's a like loss to income in the kind of short term, but everything I've done for the past 3 years has been towards longevity. It hasn't been about the short term, because I've been able, at the beginning I accumulated enough to be able to make that change, and to be able to say, okay, well, I want in 2 years' time, if I want to be able to disappear. So, that's, I think, rather than, I don't think anything has to be a defeat. Like, sure, it could be. Some people can consider it that for themselves. Like, great, that's fine. Then we both win. Because I realised, and once again, I talk about it, like I talk about kind of like the thought process behind it in my book, and I realised that kind of that was actually not, I had this choice to be full-time influencer, I guess, with my businesses in the background, and I also had the choice to lean in and really make these businesses something and make them, like much bigger, and have the potential of, growing them huge, maybe selling one day, like whatever it might be. And I think that I decided as well that actually what made me happy in the actual work itself was the head down, get it done, even like the crisis management, the working with a team till 3 a.m, the building a brand, all of that like, I was so young, and still am, that I hadn't even started my career. Like, sure, I had, but I, like everyone, I guess anyone at any time can do 3 years of something, then decide to go to business school, then decide to stop and do writing or like whatever it might be. That was my change. That was me being like, actually, what do I like in the day to day? It's not, you know, whatever. Like there was a lot of stuff that I was doing that I did love, but I saw what was happening down the line. I saw that it was really hard to maintain that after a certain amount of time. Mm-hmm. And as I said, I've always had this kind of constant anxiety that I'm going to end up doing something I don't want to do, which has made me be probably quite proactive and actually being like, actually, no, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z to make this not happen. And I think that, you know, sure, like there was part of, you know, there will be parts of it where it's like, oh, and also even better than that, it means I won't get the negativity. But I also loved the sense of community. I loved, you know, at that time, actually, I didn't get much negativity at all. Like, and I don't think you do necessarily when it's kind of like just a sharing of your life. Like people loved, especially the fact that I was at uni for 3 years. So I was showing a really realistic, like I'm still just going to be in my one room home, like, you know, doing another essay. Like it's not that exciting. And people loved that. It was, I think, because, you know, once a channel grows, it often gets unrelatable, which, you know, people have different arguments about that. But like for 3 years, mine had to stay relatable because I was still within that same room writing more essays. And I think that I absolutely loved that. Like I loved that and I will cherish that as part of my career that I really did love. I think I know that what I'm doing now is what I'm meant to be doing. I also think I'm really good at it. And I think that I feel fulfilled. Like I genuinely feel fulfilled. Most, if not every day.
What are you doing now in terms of your focus and your I guess the question that I wanted to ask to that point is, what are you, as it relates to your businesses, and I think about the same question for myself, what is the bit that you're really good at and that you think, do you know what, that's the piece that where I consider myself to be irreplaceable?
So I guess the more I, you know, as a CEO or a founder who's moving into another area, or whatever it might be, like you step back to work on the business rather than in the business, right? So the more I step back, I think the more you then realize what you're really good at, because those are the things that you keep having to jump back into. Yeah. And you keep realizing that like, I could get this person to do it and I could delegate it entirely, which, you know, you try and do, and then it keeps coming back and it's not quite right. Yeah. And for me, that's marketing and branding. That's like the, you know, the thing. And that is, I also think that a lot of successful businesses are, you know, founder-led businesses are the ones where, I was talking to a friend about it the other day actually, are the ones where the founder is product and brand and they still have that involvement, whether it's just at vision and they're briefing at the beginning of a process or whatever it might be. That is where the concentration is, because that is what the brand is. And we are in a generation where brand is everything. And so the, you know, the House of CBs, the like what, you know, they're all their brand and beyond brand, their brand bleeding through to product. And so, you know, it's good that that's my concentration as well, because, you know, that's definitely paid off. But I also think that that's the things again and again, that when I was having the discipline to step back and to actually, you know, do what I should be doing, which is not being in the execution all the time, being in the lead and being in the vision. Those were the ones where I realized I was like, okay, I have to be in this in some way.
Sure.
Even if that's, you know, as I say, writing a brief at the beginning of the process or mentoring that person through the first few times or being at the end of the approval process, whatever it might be, those are the things that nothing will go live without that going through me. Not at every stage at all, but there are stages, whether that's the beginning, the end, both, whatever it might be.
It sounds remarkably similar to many of the founders, especially young founders that I've spoken to, who have that realization, like Ben, who's been on this podcast as well from Gymshark, even like Julian, who runs Huel, where at some point, I'm speaking more about Ben here, you have, and to be fair, myself as well, because at Social Chain, I wasn't doing process, finance, legal, all that nonsense. I was doing brand marketing, where you have that realization that that is your strong point. It's also the bit that you love. And all the other things, the process, the business stuff, those were systems that were created long ago, and that there are tons of very better people than you to handle those things. And it becomes a case of, where will my investment of my time return the most for the business? And I don't think people have that conversation enough, because I think young founders sometimes feel like they have to be able to do everything, right?
I think that is the materialization of this hustle culture. I think a lot of that it's the kind of like idea of so I talk about this thing called like announcement culture, which I thought was a thing, but then I actually looked it up and isn't anywhere. So I kind of defined it within the book about essentially the idea that, you know, success is valued as more within this generation once it's announceable. So it's not the underlying stuff, even if that was doing more, it is everything that is announceable, labelable, all of the above. So it also comes on a micro level within our everyday. Like we like to tick things, we like to see the things ticked off. Like we like to, you know, we'd probably rather see 10 things ticked off our to-do list than have actually made some real thinking progress in a concept that like whatever, because that's the way it's, you know, you feel more productive, you feel like you've done more. And I think that that's also an area where founders, people on social media who are within businesses, whatever, they need to be seen to be doing everything to be validated. And I don't think that's a personal problem. I think I've had it 100%. I think I still have it at certain points. But, you know, it's a validation through being told you're legitimate because you do things. And like, I'm not going to lie, I don't know half of the shit that goes on in our finance meetings, and I will sit there and I will look at it and I'll look at, you know, and it like, that's great. And I need to be over it and I need to have that understanding and I'll ask the questions. But I also think that the second I let that fear of illegitimacy by not doing everything leave, was the second that I was able to actually be a leader, because I was able to realize that actually, what if I'm better than everyone at their specific things, then we've got a business that is as big as one person. Like, as it goes, like, you should hire people that are better than you at their specific disciplines. So like, even if you're micromanaging, if you're being like a bottleneck, if you're like whatever it might be, you are automatically causing a problem, or not even necessarily causing a problem. It might work, you know, like it might go to plan, but you are restricting that growth, that potential, that magnitude of the business, because you are, and it's for your ego. It is not for anything other than your ego, even if that's an innocent thing. Even, you know, as I say, I still do it, I'm sure, at points. Even if that's, you know, like you want to be said to be on this project that did really well. Mm-hmm. And I think that as a founder, you have to get to a point where that ego, of course, it's like a validation thing and it's a coping mechanism, and you'd like to think that you always do the best for your business. But especially when we're looked at online and when, you know, we need to be seen that we're involved in this, that, and the other, because otherwise people think, you know, like, especially someone who, I'm sure lots of people think I'm just the face of the business, whatever. So like, maybe I need to prove that I do X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
But the second I stopped doing that was the second I, as I say, was actually able to do my job.
Remarkable. When I was 18, 19, 20, starting the business, because I was young, I'm going to be honest, I definitely feared hiring really experienced people, because I thought, well, how am I going to manage them? And they're going to figure out that I'm not that experienced, and it's going to be difficult. And so I look at the first 10 hires I did, and they're all like kids.
Yeah.
I'm like, why did I hire 10 kids? And then I get to a point where I'm like 21, 22, and I start Social Chain, and I hire some really experienced people. Then they go on to hire loads of, because the people you have hiring.
they know what their teams need to look like. I
always say in our companies, I'm like, the most important people are the people you have hiring all the other people, right?
So, absolutely.
And my life became 99.9% easier when we got better people in, and I fell back and stopped letting my ego or my insecurities run the show. And the other thing, which I wasn't expecting, is it actually makes you look so much better when your business works.
I think the thing is that like, you've got to ask yourself, would you like the business to have the glory, or would you like you to have the glory? And like, then realize that if the business has the glory, you still have the glory, but you just have to wait a bit. Like you just have to not need to be validated every day by the fact that you were involved on that project that did well, or the fact that you signed that off. I don't need to sign something off if the team is made of people who are better than me. And like, fine, actually, I'm sure there are people who are far better than me within branding, but it's my brand. So like, you know, like still that's going to be like put in a certain direction. But I think you're completely right. I mean, I actually hired, you know, in my final year of uni, I actually had 3 students working for me, or 1 student and 2 fresh grads, and they were great. Like, they were fantastic. And I think they're, you know, amazing. One of them's still working within Tala now. And I think that actually was my only option at the time. Like, I couldn't afford to hire, you know, like any more than that. And it was people who I put them through like so many tasks. And I was like, I need you to be the right person, because I'm about to launch a business and do my finals at the same time. So I'm going to be outsourcing. And I always say, actually, a lot of the reason for my success was also the fact that I was forced to outsource so early, based on the fact that I was at university and Oxford had always been my dream. As I say, I applied twice. Like, I was not going to let it go. I thought I deserved to be there, and I proved when I was there that I did. And I think that that I was so committed to getting to the end of that, getting what I deserved, and, you know, and being proud of myself, even though that wasn't necessarily my dream anymore. That was my like childhood dream. I was so convinced that that was going to happen that I had to outsource immediately, essentially.
And who was that first key senior hire that came into your business, and how did it feel when you saw the salary and you thought, fuck?
Yeah, so salary wise, those are more recent. Those are much more recent. Those are within the part. Actually, probably right before I finished uni, there was someone who we hired, and I was like, but I actually managed to get someone else to hire them. Okay. So to work on essentially what would be my account. But even then I was kind of looking at that and I was like, you know, like that, regardless of who's hiring, it affects the P&L. So like, you know, but then more recently there have been, you know, we've been hiring head of product from Sweaty Betty, you know, like all of the like the people and like it's, but also like those are the ones where I have to like hype myself up to go into the interview, because I'm like, you graduated from my university 20 years ago. I graduated not even 2 years ago. Like, do I ask you for like help? Like, do I ask you for permission to ask you questions? And I think that it all ties in as well, because as soon as you realize that you don't need to be that person, you also realize that they're not wanting you to be that person. They want to come in and do their expertise. They don't want you to be like, oh, I just want to check over this because I'm the founder or I'm the CEO. They just want to do their job. And the better they do their job, the better you do their job, the better you do the job, the better they do their job. It's all cyclical, but it's like ego and validation and legitimacy that ties together to make this kind of big old like cauldron of like, this is probably ineffective, but I have to be not even validated. I don't think it's vapid. Like, I don't think it's like, you know, I don't think it's necessarily ego in a bad way. I think it comes from like the fact that all of us have some insecurity that needs to be, you know, especially if you start a business young, and especially if you feel like, oh, like, wow, I'm in this position. Like, you have to be, either you're like incredibly confident somehow and like completely full of yourself, but I genuinely believe that most of us have some insecurities about
imposter syndromes.
And so like it's all tied in. I don't think it's a bad thing. I don't think it makes you a bad person. As I said, I have it a lot, but I think you have to recognize it. And I think that's the first thing I'd say I actually had a fellow founder messaged me like 2 days ago, and she was like, I just wanted to tell you what you told me about a year ago, saying like everything, you know, she was at the stage where I was like, you need to be hiring people, and she was like, but it's expensive. And I was like, I know, but they will pay for themselves. Because like if you know, like even not even necessarily the right people, like even if it's admin, even if it's like whatever, you should be doing the things that only you can do, whether you're self-employed, whether you're like whatever it might be. And you know, like my like I grew up with like my dad was self-employed, like all of these things, and I think that you see your like there are so many different ways of working, and I was thinking, because I've seen people do things one way, like I need to prove myself and I need to do that. Proving myself is more effective if I have a team of amazing people. And that's been like one of my biggest lessons.
I asked you then what you were really good at within the business. You talked about branding and marketing. So I'm going to ask you the opposite question. As the boss, as Grace Beverley, the CEO, what are you really bad at? Big silence.
Anything? Careful. I think there's probably like
we're going to bring in her PA now.
Would you like to talk? I think there are probably a lot of things. I think there's definitely. I think one of my things is the thing we've been talking about, getting involved where I don't need to be involved. I think that's probably, you know, and I think I have an anxiety around that actually, you know, there have been times where I haven't got involved where I probably should have, because I was getting too confident with my moving away, and then it just wasn't right, and the product didn't shift enough, or whatever it might have been. And so I think probably that's one of my main things. And also, only recently have I realized how much confidence I have to have in people. And I think it was actually based on talking about how shitty some of Google's rules are, actually in Work Rules, the book about Google working culture, he says that like one of the most important things at Google is that they encourage and empower everyone to be like their own founder. So like if they're on a project, like they should be founder of that project, and they should feel empowered to also like look at me and be like, no, like this is not how it, and I think that stood with me so much, because I was like, you know what, like the next day I emailed someone who was hiring someone within their team, and they were like, should we get them on this or this? And I was like, you decide. Like, you decide. We know the end goal. Any way we get there, I'm happy with. You decide. Instantly saw that, because people also want to be empowered with that. And also people often, do much better when they're given the responsibility. And so I think that some of that, what we've just been talking about, is probably one of my biggest weaknesses, because I'm so terrified that something will go wrong. And obviously, as the, success has many fathers, and like all of that, like, you have to take responsibility when it goes wrong. It doesn't matter whether it wasn't you, whatever it might be.
I mean, something goes wrong, right?
Yeah.
With your brand, Grace Beverley is the one that they
100%.
hold responsible. Yeah. So intern over here.
But also something goes right.
True. But intern over here says something, responds to a DM, whatever. You've got to almost justify that, even if, not even justify it, but apologize.
Yeah, maybe. And it's happened multiple times. And I think that's...
How do you not then go to the intern and say, you motherfucker?
Because I think if it was enough for me to do that, I think it would be much more gracious for me to just probably get rid of them, as in essentially to say, like, this is not the right place. Because it also, there's an element of that that's not understanding the brand, that's not understanding who we are, our ethos or whatever. And if it's that far out of line, it's like, okay, well, this is a mismatch here then. But I think that, so my two options then, both of them involve, like, being gracious in some way. And one of that is fixing it. If I genuinely believe that it was an honest mistake and it came across wrong, or like whatever it might be, then fine. And I will work with them to deal with it. And I don't believe, maybe someone will disagree, but I don't believe I have ever gone to someone and been like, how dare you? You've sacrificed this. You've done all of that. Because also they do the work every single day to make the company great. And yeah, it's frustrating. Like, trust me, like, I don't see that and think like, it's fine because last week they did a nice post or like whatever. But like, there is still an element of it that's like frustrated, and that's like, feels like you've taken 10 steps back and is terrified that you're about to be cancelled, or like whatever it might be. But there's either a decision then to decide it's a mismatch, or to decide it's still a match and it was an honest mistake. Neither of those involve like ripping someone to shreds. So
how do you sometimes, though, when you do get like emotion in business, it's your baby, it's sometimes, anger or, I don't know, frustrations, they do manifest themselves in business in certain ways. Like I'd be lying if I said that I didn't have days where I was frustrated and people knew. I try not to be as much as I can. I try and remain a little bit calm, especially when it's most chaotic.
Yeah. Especially in offices. I think that's particularly, like, we have the luxury now. I'm like, well, you can't see me. Like, as in, I think I often, like, I think probably near our office, the like cafes, they know me well, because I will go in there. I will take myself, I will exit, because I think in life and in business, I don't believe in, I don't think I necessarily react in that way naturally, and I think to my detriment sometimes, because sometimes you do need to say this is absolutely not right or whatever. But I think it's the same thing as I kind of talked about before, like, I'd rather work out the best way to deal with it. There have been times where I've picked up the phone and I've been like, what the fuck has gone wrong? Like why would you do that? Like, this makes absolutely no sense. Like, this is, you should know better, like all of that. And they are, first of all, they are very few and far between. I'm not saying that I don't say that to my housemates. And I'm like, how fucking dare he? Like, I don't understand why he would do that. Like, he knows that's not the case. But I mean, you might disagree. I don't think like, I'm not a...
She's looking at her PA.
She also is paid to say no. So, but I genuinely, I'm not a...
She's
in the
just
same
sent me
way
a
as,
text here.
Don't make her shout.
Yeah,
but I'm not. I think I'm the same in relationships, friendships, like everything. I am a walk out of the room and come back in half an hour, and at that point I'll either shout or I'll, but I'm not instantly kind of in that moment, which is why I sometimes also find social media hard, because I don't want to react in the moment, and social media warrants an instant reaction because that's the only way that you're being true to yourself, or like whatever it might be. Like, I often will think something, when you're angry and you think something, you're so angry about it, and then half an hour later I won't be, or I'll think it's different, or I'll think someone didn't mean that, or whatever it might be. And so I try, and even though social media doesn't necessarily allow for that amount of kind of like discussion, I do try and like, just... Yeah. And that's kind of, in general, how I deal with things. I go and spend some time by myself, and if anyone talks to me.
If you are to become the person... you want to become.
Mm-hmm.
What does that person look like in terms of values, the way they conduct themselves, react to things?
I think for me, it's a lot of repositioning. As I said, like, I think that I grew on social media at a time where I was particularly low, and therefore, like, a lot of that was made up with validation. Therefore, like, I think one of my main aims and one of my main, like, what I've been working towards for the past, year or so has been that kind of self-validation and that self-worth. And I think that through and through, unfaltering self-worth is, I don't know whether it's even like a reality. Like, I think people have faltering views of themselves, just like they do every other person. You can love someone absolutely unconditionally, and you can think in one moment, like, yeah, like, why did they do that? Or like, I think that's a terrible trait about them or whatever. And I think the important thing is being able to bounce back from that into the original position, or being able to consider that and still have that worth or love or whatever. And I think to become the person who I want to be, I think it's, I'm quite, happy with where I am now. And I think there are, like, I know what I need to improve in terms of, like, and I think a lot of it comes down to my own confidence and my own, like, assurance in myself in order not to project that elsewhere. So yeah, like, in general, I think that's probably one of my main things. Being completely honest, I don't think it involves, like, money or, like, growth in any other way. I think the first thing that I know that I need to improve on is that.
How does one go about improving in their self-validation?
I would love to know.
what have you, anything
but
worked?
I think in general, it's just like it's an understanding of yourself. It's an understanding that you're going to fuck up. It's an understanding that you're going to think one thing and do another. And I think that part of that, as I say, that was part of the reason, I did move away from social media, because it was like, I can't have all these people telling me one thing, even if it's a great thing, because it doesn't allow you to be, like, completely in touch with yourself and know those differences. Yeah, exactly. Like, even if it's the people blowing smoke up your ass, like, you then can't get that from yourself because you're constantly, like, clouded by that. If it's people hating, it's the same thing. So I think that, like, I don't necessarily know. I think all it can be is being in touch with yourself and understanding that you are going to do things wrong. I think I'm very harsh on myself in the way that I don't like doing things wrong, and I work very hard not to do things wrong. And so when I do, it hits me hard. And I think that part of that is learning that.
Does it hit you hard?
Yeah, I think in general it really does. And I think that I think that that's kind of one of the things that you have to then develop, that kind of self-love and all of that, to be able to say, okay, great, well, like, but I'm as I've said, got this, like, Miss Trunchbull living in my head who just wants one thing and one thing only, and it constantly changes and it's constantly more. And I think that's an important thing to address.
Two things. The first one is Instagram. You kept Instagram.
Yes.
Why?
I like Instagram in general. I think that, I think one of the sad things that I found about kind of pivoting was that I loved what I got from things like YouTube in terms of, like, the community, as I say, that, like, I loved being able to share that. And I was at this really weird point where I loved sharing my life, but I also didn't like sharing my life, because and it was, there are bad things and good things about everything, but it was like the highs were really high and the lows were really low. And so it's kind of like toxic in that way. And I think that Instagram and Twitter probably both can be used in a way where I try and use it more as like I post way more than like a regular non-Instagram, non-public eye, whatever person would post, but I don't use it as a platform for anything other than just social media. Like, if that makes any sense at all. It's kind of, it's pretty much my only platform, and I just, I post as and when I want. I don't need to post. I don't need to come across a certain way. Because I don't need to do stories at all one day, whereas, yeah. And
probably the most widely, there was a report out that said Instagram is probably the worst platform for mental health. Well, you can see why. Visuals, filtered visuals, unrealistic comparisons.
Yeah, I think I also thought that no matter what I didn't like or what I wanted to pivot to, I also owed it to myself to be able to celebrate my success in some ways. And I think that, that however many messages I get from people saying, I know you've moved off other platforms, but please don't delete Instagram because, you know, X, Y, Z, like whatever it might be. Like everyone has their people who really, not necessarily really need them, but really, really benefit from them. And I think that I also saw a lack of representation for women in the business space who also shout about it. And I think there's a reason for it. Like, I wouldn't encourage women to shout about it, not from a moral perspective, but because you will be ripped to shreds and because people will have preconceptions that are different from successful men. Mm-hmm. And, you know, whether that's showing material things or like whatever it might be, it's perceived as differently. And therefore, like, but I did think in that way that not only do I want to be able to do that, I also think that, you know, I think I'd like to do it also to make sure, you know, to be able to be in that landscape. And I think that I kind of owed it to myself also to be able to celebrate that, even if I was moving away from that being my job. I don't post in any way the same as I posted when that was my job. I post very differently, but, you know, I love it.
Have you got any sort of big regrets in your life that you've, that might help others avoid making those same mistakes?
I think it's the kind of same tied in thing again. It's just anything to do with allowing focus on other people's perception of you over your focus on your perception of yourself. But I don't think I'm not really like as I've said, much to my detriment and to my success, I don't necessarily concentrate on those, maybe it's that toxic positivity thing you said or whatever. I don't necessarily concentrate on those downfalls. Like I feel like everything that's gone wrong, like not getting into Oxford the first time or whatever, that led to me having a really great corporate job and I was able to make some money and I was able to make, you know, like work in ecom for a bit, you know, like all of those things. And I think that I'm very like, my pick yourself back up attitude is bad in some ways, but the way it's good is also allowing you to not have many regrets because you always make something out of a bad thing, and therefore it's really hard to look back and say that was shit, because fine, even if it didn't lead to what you thought it would. Like I had, for example, I had my absolute dream job lined up for April and it got cancelled because of the pandemic. And, you know, I'm like, was very lucky to be in an industry that was largely unaffected. In fact, in some ways did really well. And I was so devastated about that. And like, maybe it will happen, maybe it won't. But like, you know, I think that was something that couldn't be a regret, couldn't be whatever. But I also know that at this point, I've moved so much away from social media in that time that probably would have put me on a, like, blasted me in a way that actually maybe I wouldn't have been able to deal with. And I think that, you know, kind of the world works in like mysterious ways, and like maybe that wasn't right, and maybe I wouldn't say yes if I got that opportunity again. And I think that actually just I guess maybe it is a toxic positivity, maybe it is like, maybe I should be, you know, I don't allow myself to be sad about those things when I maybe should be, or I should address them. But I think part of that means that when I am asked about my regrets, I have kind of very little.
That's good. I mean, regrets that come with their upsides, right? And the value and the lessons that they teach you. So it's hard.
Absolutely. And I don't think it's bad to have regrets. Yeah. I think acknowledging your regrets is really important to be able to move forward. Maybe I block them out. I bet
you can't wait for people to get your book, right?
Yeah.
Because it's a real labor of love, right?
Yeah. I mean, I'm terrified at the same time. And I'm sure there'll be some people.
Why?
I think it's the same as a business. If you pour that much love and your soul into something, if people hate it, they essentially hate you. Like, that's never nice. It doesn't matter whether you're a bad person or whatever. Like, it's not something you want. And I think also, as I say, there's a lot that I've put in there that I probably wouldn't have talked about online because there's a delayed feedback. Yeah. There's, you know, I don't need to hear what someone thinks about that in that moment. And so I'm excited, I'm terrified, but you know, and it's also very different. Like, it's different from what I've been doing. It's not entirely about business. It's not entirely about, you know, X, Y, Z. It's different. Like, it's essentially another pivot in one way. And I think that, you know, I'm excited, and equally, like, you know, I think about it for some reason last night was one of the nights that I had kind of like constantly waking up. I was like, well, what if people don't like this bit? And like, what if people, you know? And I think that that's not something you control. And like, I think the only way to guarantee not having that would be to write a blank book, which I don't have much interest in.
And is that those worries? Because I'll be honest, I don't have those worries.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I've spoken to other authors that, you know, when I talked about them being excited about their book coming out, they also didn't express those worries.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering where those have come from.
Maybe it's because I'm conditioned to having a constant feedback loop of, whether on the businesses, whether on my socials, whatever it might be. Or maybe it's because I'm more insecure about those feedback things. Like maybe it is, but I think that it's also, I care a lot. So, I care a lot about it. I care a lot about my well-being. I care a lot about, and I feel like some of that, is acknowledged that it's not necessarily even the right thing. Like I want to be able to write my truth and to write what I genuinely believe in. And for someone to say, I don't believe in that. And
this kind of goes back to the battle we were just talking about there. So you said you wanted to be less sort of connected to people's feedback.
Well, I write in the book, I write, at the same time, like I don't, obviously it's completely irrational to want to be liked by everyone. And I don't want to be liked by everyone. But I think in the same way, everyone who is in the public eye and sees something shit or whatever it might be, as in, it's just, it's a natural reaction. Like, yeah. So I think, but I'm very, very excited. And I think that the reaction so far to, the concept, to the excerpts, to everything has been amazing. And so I think that I should probably just be more excited about it. And, yeah.
You're a very inspired entrepreneur. I noticed this when I was going through your history over the last 4 years. You've started several businesses. You've had several ideas within those businesses, and you seem like a constant stream of ideas, right? I imagine that's also a problem.
Yes.
Right? My early investors told me, they said they kept hitting me with this whip and saying, Steve, stop fucking emailing us with a new idea all the time. How have you been able to distinguish between what's an idea worth pursuing and what's because you could, when you get a little bit of resource and you have teams of people, you could at any time be the CEO that's walking in every day and saying, we're going to do
this,
a new thing. That can be unhelpful. I'm still guilty of it.
Yeah. And I'm sure I am. I'm sure I am.
How would you decide what to pursue?
I think I use our audience a lot. I think that one of the real benefits of having I'm Gen Z. So having a Gen Z led brand for
You're Gen Z?
Yeah, I'm the first year of Gen Z.
Millennial.
And I think one of the benefits is like everyone's constantly like, how do we market to Gen Z? How do we do all of this? And I'm definitely not TikTok? Like Gen Z. Like, don't ask me to do a TikTok dance. But like I think that in that way, I feed off our audience a lot. Like I know I'm not the most experienced at branding. That doesn't mean I'm not the best at branding for our brand. That means I'm not the most experienced. So how can I use that inexperience? How can I leverage off people? How can I can just ask people sometimes. Like I can just say like, would you be interested in this? And I used to be like, no, because they can only see the final thing. And then sometimes people have said like, yes, yeah. And then I've been like, actually, no. But I think it's instinct. I think some of it's instinct. I think the more you know your brand, the more you really like know your brand. And I think that lots of the time, it's an equal problem when other people have ideas and you're like, no, but I want you to have more ideas, but not that one. Like, and I think that, it's just a constant learning process. And I'm sure I have had ideas that have gone, that just haven't gone as well as they should have. And I think that that's a constant thing. I think in fashion, especially, like you're going to have like a certain amount of things that don't sell as well as they should, like whatever it might be. And that's just a constant reality. So I don't think it's necessarily about always picking out the best ideas. I think it's about picking out the right number of ideas, usually fewer, and executing them well.
And as we look forward to your future, I'm sure there's plenty more ideas to come. Is there anything in the pipeline that one might be able to know about?
Well, actually, because I've started 2 businesses, the one question kind of press, everything always asks is like, what's next? What's the next business? And there just really isn't going to be one for a while. Like I think people don't, and I kind of don't believe myself as well. But I think currently I am so maxed out. I think because I have 2 businesses, but I also have my personal brand.
Sure.
So, the book, the press, it is a business, and that's a lot. If you think of the amount of days in the week. So you're thinking like 5 days. I'm really strict on weekends. So hate to tell the hustle culture crew, but I take weekends and I'm strict on them. And so 5 days a week, split between technically 3 businesses. That's already a lot of time blocking to establish what you spend your time on and where. And bearing in mind that about 50% of this, or not 50%, 40% of the stuff I do will also be unexpected. So I think that, as I've said, the kind of ethos I have about constantly pushing on and doing more is actually detrimental when it comes to doing things well. And so I think that, I've had ideas and nearly started multiple businesses in this time. At one point, I even wanted to do like a mini, essentially, influencer VC of some form. And but actually, I want to prove to myself, and I think I have, and I think I can continue to do so. I want to prove that I can do these well, and I can have patience, and it's not about more, because I think some of that comes from the fact that, when things settle, it's really easy to push for more when it's just at a settling state. And I constantly, why can't I push for more within those businesses?
Deeper.
Exactly. And growth and wider and more breadth and everything. And I think that that's part of my plan. So it might not be new businesses, but huge projects sometimes within a business sometimes take just as much as a new business. And I think that, probably if my businesses were taken away from me tomorrow, I'd probably have an excellent, another one the next day. And that's how I'm programmed. And I'm thankful for that, because, that's definitely part of the reason why I've got to where I am. But I also think that it's been a big lesson for me to learn that more is not always more.
Yes. That's the lesson that I also learned. And I then started becoming a bit of a preacher to my friends who would brag about having 5 businesses, and me saying one good one is much more impressive.
But that's the thing. I would almost be people, as I've said, people would say about the end of uni when I was doing, all of these things. And I think I recognised, probably too late, but at some point I recognised that it wasn't about that. And therefore I kind of was almost embarrassed when people were like, she's got 72 businesses. Because I'd be like, I'd rather have one that was doing really well. I'm currently concentrating on 2 doing really well. Mm-hmm. And a third one, which is my personal brand.
Which is Yeah.
And then, and that one will be the key to longevity for the rest of my career. But so will these 2 if they're done right, because you don't need longevity, if that happens. And so I think I'm lucky to be in a position where I have many different potential paths. And the most productive thing I can do in that moment is decide on the path and to stick to it. And I think it's fickle. And I think that I can be fickle in like a hard work, diligent way, because I just want to do more and quicker and all of that. But actually, the toughest thing I can do is just stand still and do it right.
And where does this end then for your businesses in your view? Because when we're entrepreneurs, we kind of forecast, 5 years time, I'll sell this or I'll do this or whatever, I'll step away. What's your thinking with your businesses?
I think it depends. I think that, for example, I'll have a view. I'll say okay, well, I'll maybe aim to sell this one in 2 years, and then this one I'll keep on, and I'll, do that forever. And I think that then it changes. Then the other one starts to get really exciting and really profitable, and you're like, well, maybe I'll keep this one for longer. So I think that I've got used to the fact that that's not, there's probably not, I've probably got used to the fact that actually there'll be a point where, rather than saying, okay, in 2 years I'm going to do this, it'll be shit, I'm done. I'm done, and therefore, and that's too late. But I know it will be like that, because I know I will push it to, the end or whatever it might be. But I'm open. I'm very open to it. I think also I'm very much at the beginning of this. Shreddy, 4 years old, Tala, not even 2 years old yet. And I think that I'd be doing myself a disservice to kind of it's exactly what I would do. Jump to the next. When can I sell it? When can I get all of this? But especially because when you have a business, you kind of program to assume that by the time you've done this, you're officially, you're no longer an entrepreneur, you sold a business for X or whatever. And it is a success point. It's a huge, it's a huge accolade. And I think that for me, it's just about constantly keeping in touch with myself and what I want for the businesses as well. Because I'm sure there'll be a point where I'm like, I can't do that.
Yeah.
This needs X amount of funding, or this actually needs to be acquired, or whatever it will be. Don't think it will be soon, but there might be a point, and there probably will be a point that happens. Or where, we've grown hugely recently. I have a terrifying thought of what if it gets too corporate at one stage? And then, it's not a joy for me anymore. And at that point, I'd very much consider that. So I think it's very much an open consideration constantly for me. And I think that the best thing I can do, again, is just not
dwell on it too much now.
Yeah, exactly.
Have you managed to achieve balance in your life?
Well, this is the sort of whole point of the book, I guess. But
you don't need the book. This is
exactly, guys.
You're probably just going to be fucking delete half.
I think I think I'm doing well at the moment. I think I wasn't doing well this time a year ago. I think that I am probably doing well, you know, because, for example, like as I've talked about, like I'm not in a relationship, so maybe like that would throw it all off or whatever it might be. But I think at the moment I'm doing it well, and probably too much of a focus on work, but that's what balance looks like to me at the moment. It's not 50-50. It's not like a tipping set of scales. It's like,
sure, are you happy?
This is what's added up. Yeah, I'm definitely happy. I think I'm particularly happy at the moment because I feel like I'm somehow simultaneously living my early 20s life whilst also being, you know, being in this amazing position. And that, for me, that was the main thing I wanted, because I just was, you know, this more thing was like, you don't need to be acting like you're 40. Like, you know, and so I've really tried to maintain that, even though it's strange for me to be in my position and living with 3 of my friends in my house or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like I'm having that, and I feel like that was a real, you know, that was a big thing for me, and I'm you know, happy that it doesn't necessarily have to be that I'm in like some sick high-rise apartment by myself with like X, Y, Z or whatever, and that for me is my happiness.
Thank you. It's been wonderful speaking to you. I find you so inspiring, and you know, people have said to me as I've like gone through my journey that I'm like a wise head on shoulders, whatever. But you like really, really are.
Oh, thank you. Well, you are.
No, but you like really are. Like you're 23. I remember when I was 23, I was still largely an idiot, and you seem to have figured out.
I can be, you know,
no, I know, but it's like the level of, I'd say, self-awareness, right? And I can see as you're speaking in the way that you answer questions, you're also really trying to appreciate nuance. That's something it took me a long time to do, right? So I thought the world was the way I saw it. If you don't work hard, then you are inferior.
Yeah.
Right. And then, but I can see you're being very considered in how you speak and appreciating nuance. And I think that's the trait of someone that's had their life accelerated in the public eye or through, you know, pressure of running businesses, but just someone that has a very wise head on their shoulders. And you're inspiring as hell.
Thank you.
And you're a lovely human being. So I want to thank you for coming here today and giving me your time.
Thanks for having me. It's been great.
When can we buy your book? April. I know it's out. We can pre-order now.
14th. 15th. Thank you, Lexi.
April the 15th. Yeah. I know mine is March, so
yeah.
But you can pre-order now.
20
something.
Oh yeah. We'll pre-order is.
Dom, when is my book out? 25th of March. We'll cut it so it looks like we got it right first time. I'll publish it.
You can pre-order both now.
Amazing.
Maybe so many people will pre-order the same ones that, you know, when Amazon assigns like a specific bundle.
People who
exactly. And they're like, you can get these two together for this. Mm-hmm. I think that's the aim from this.
Do go and check it out, because I know how much you put into it personally. And sometimes I sit down with people and I know they had some ghostwriter create the whole thing, but speaking to you on and off camera, I know how much you've poured into it. And when people do that, I think they create really remarkable pieces of work and unique thoughts. So thanks again for coming on. You're a really, really special person, and it's an honor to have you here. Thanks.
Thank you.